Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are going to discuss a topic that has long been on our minds here at the Circle. And while we talk about it all the time in Course Companions classes, and we even hosted a Sunday gathering on it, we've never been quite brave enough to truly go public on this until now. And that topic, of course, is the cult of self, which is the name that has been given to self-oriented culture. This is the culture that has exploded in recent years in ways that we believe have taken the world and by extension taken the course backwards. Cult of self is not our language. It's also been described as a culture of narcissism or an age of narcissism, but whatever you call it, it's a phenomena that is changing the nature of society around the world in some very profound ways. And so that is what we are going to talk about today. Thank you once again to those of you who are joining us live. As an update, Robert and I are now recording podcasts every Tuesday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. So you're invited to join us. There's no charge. This is a completely free offering. And so if you want the link, just go to circleofa.org/events. I think that's it for the housekeeping. So we can turn our attention to our topic for today, which is really juicy. Robert, I think we're all looking at the state of the world today and wondering what is going on, but we also know it's not just one thing, right? Like there are a host of conditions that have allowed things to get to this place where global order itself feels in question. And as I've mentioned, it's our view that the cult of self is a contributor to this societal decline. It's one of those things that have paved the way for the rest of things to get this bad. And so let's begin by defining the cult of self. What is it in your view, and why does it matter so much?
Yeah, well, I think this probably probably had its roots in about the 60s. By the 70s were called the me decade, right? So this has been going on for many decades now, but it seems like it's just gathering steam over time rather than blowing itself out. In my view, the basic idea behind the cult of self is that there's this culture-wide value system that has come in. It has not only washed through our whole culture, it pervades modern psychology and psychotherapy. I think it's almost taken over contemporary spirituality. It's washed right into the course community. It's even leaked into evangelical Christianity. It's like no corner almost is free of it. And what I think of when I use that term, the cult of self, which is a natural term. I mean, it came to my mind without having read it, but once I looked for it on the internet, other people have used it. It's just a logical term. So what comes to my mind is this whole value system that's oriented around the self. So in the past, we saw the self as having good and evil in it, and it was essentially accountable to external standards of right and wrong, to the needs of other people and the needs of society as a whole, and to the will and commands of God. So the self was a mixed bag accountable to this much larger picture. And in contemporary culture, the attitude seems to be, no, you're the center of it all. Rather than you bending to all those things bend to you. It's about you. It's about your magnificence. It's about your power. It's about accepting you and affirming you. And you are seen as just inherently, innately good. And if there's anything wrong with you, it's come from the outside, from how the world has treated you, especially in childhood. So if there are things wrong with you, they kind of got put there as an intrusion from the outside, intruding on the natural good you.
And it feels like this is something that was building steam in society. You mentioned that the boomer, I think the boomer generation was also referred to as the me generation. So it's been pushing, society's been pushing in this direction for a while. But the way it's spilled into spirituality, I think happened more in the 90s with The Secret and the prosperity gospel and this idea of using spiritual values for personal empowerment. Is that where you think the cult of self came into spirituality?
I think it was in there before that. First of all, The Secret was the 2000s, I'm sure. But I remember starting to do a little bit of teaching and writing in the early to mid 80s and feeling like it was in full swing then.
Mm-hmm.
So I
So
think it's just been around.
yeah, and so it, rather than sort of bending ourselves to universal spiritual values and even bending ourselves to the collective good, we have somehow started to bend ourselves to ourselves, right?
Right. It's all
where
about me.
where the purpose of this life is to live your best one, and that all of your activity should be oriented around that. And the reason why I mentioned The Secret, I thought it was the 90s, I guess maybe it is the 2000s, I'm not entirely sure. But this idea, like The Secret is that your thoughts control the universe. And for so many, that
And you
has
should use
been
them to manifest wealth and material
your
abundance.
thoughts control the universe, so you should use those thoughts to get what you want.
Right.
And that sounds like a really empowering thing. Go out there and grab it. But if all we're doing is individually going after our personal desires, then what are we going to have if not a moral collapse? And doesn't that feel like what's going on in the world today? It just feels like rather than a collective that is in it for the collective so that everyone has a shot at their best life, all we're doing is trying to live our own best life, even if that's at the expense of someone else's best life, right?
Yeah, and I think there are many facets to this. Like that's one facet. Another facet is just this idea that I should be constantly just affirming me. In the past, we had this respect for what the course calls the ego. The course sees the ego as kind of analogous to the devil. Um, and so in the past, we realized we had to watch out for those elements in human nature that were set against the good and against the welfare of the whole and so on. We had to, protect against those and try to ideally, transform those. And now we're thinking, hey, if it's in here, I've got to affirm it. There's a reason I'm doing my best. That's why it's there, because I'm doing my best, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's another facet of it. And I think this is a many-headed beast.
Yeah. And so it's a many-headed beast, but at the same time, we're so embedded in it. It's like we're in the belly of this beast and we don't even know it. And so what are some ways in which we can spot the cult of self at work in the world and in spirituality?
Good question. I think before I try to answer that, I think one thing that comes to my mind that should be said about this is that in the spiritual world, we aren't seeing this as a kind of a corrosion, a corruption, a temptation. We are seeing this as the height of spiritual
We're
wisdom.
seeing this as an evolution.
It's cutting edge. We are taking things past. If you read spiritual writings from before, like the 70s, from like the 50s and 40s and such, they sound so old school. they talk about, morality and serving other people. And they sound to us like, whoa, were they like some kind of raving Christians? No, it's just back then, that's how people talked. We didn't see things the way we see them now. Now it's all evolved, and you're right, we think it's an evolution, but I feel like it's a retrogression.
Right. So this is an important point to draw out. So you were saying before that there was a healthy respect for that within us that is, we call in course language, we call the ego. I mean, ego is not specific to the course, but you know what I mean? That there's this side of us that's just out to separate, it's out to attack, it's out for self-preservation. And before it was like, be on the lookout for that.
Right.
And now it's more like, let's dance with that and let's use this part of us to serve our goals.
Yeah. Well, what that brings to mind is, you and I, a couple of months ago, we latched on to this op-ed piece in the New York Times by David Brooks called The Dark Century. And for a while, that was a real touchstone for us, because basically what he said, he didn't use the term cult of self, but the concept was completely there.
He used cult of narcissism.
Yeah, well, close enough.
Mm-hmm.
So what he was saying was that the country of the United States was founded with a respect for individual virtue, but a clear awareness of what Patrick Henry called the depravity of human nature. And the entire system was set up to protect against that. And part of what was done was the founders recognized the need for this whole network of institutions and practices, including churches and schools and patriotic rituals and manners, that would basically, over the lifetime of someone, instill in that person a certain amount of civic virtue, so that that person acted on and stood more for civic virtue rather than just giving in to the frailties of human passion and greed. And what he said was that in the last several decades, he says over the past few generations, this culture of narcissism has taken hold with the view that human beings should be unshackled from restraint. And when you unshackle people, you unshackle that part of them as well. What's come in is a naive view in which human nature is naturally good. And all the institutions that were there to put guardrails up to that depravity within us, of course we'll call it the ego, and instill civic virtue instead, like churches and schools and so on, they've been slowly kind of eroded, with the result that, as he said, history is reverting to barbarism. Pretty dramatic line.
Yeah. And one of the things that I pulled from that op-ed from David Brooks, and if you haven't read it, it's called The Dark Century. I think he wrote it in February, and it's really illuminating, is he talked about how democracy itself isn't a natural thing. I think he called it an artificial accomplishment. And the idea is that, as you're saying, human nature itself has an element of depravity in it. We have that ego side. And so rather than kind of bringing it in and elevating ourselves to God and saying, if we have it, it must be good, there needs to be some healthy suspicion of that. And that's what the founding fathers put in place with the grand experiment of America itself. That's why we have a separation of powers. That's why, we have institutions that are meant to mold a citizenry that can have a true democracy. Because left to our own devices, that depravity kind of takes over, and
absolutely
we bend to that within ourselves. And so the idea is, if you have these institutions like the law, like free press, free speech, etc., then the individuals bend to that, and then society works. And there's a total collapse of that now.
Well,
We,
we seem to be heading there, don't we?
we don't trust our courts anymore for good reason. They're quite partisan these days. Free press is being attacked. So anyway, all of the government, I mean, don't get me started. So the institutions that we are supposed to bend towards are cracking. And part of the reason why that's happening around the world is because we're putting the focus on ourselves. It's inward versus outward. All we really seem to be pushing for is how do we elevate this body versus how do we go out there and stand for the greater good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read an article the other day where a study was done about how Australia dealt with the pandemic. And I know a lot of our listeners are not going to want to hear more about the pandemic, but what this study concluded is that if the United States had had Australia's success, we would have saved 900,000 out of a million deaths. So 9/10. And they said the single greatest factor was that, and I know this is happening around the world, but I think the US is a hotbed of the cult of self, unfortunately. The single greatest factor was trust. That in Australia, there was greater trust for government, greater trust for science, and greater trust in their fellow citizens. And that trust factor, this study concluded, was the single greatest factor in saving and having 1/10 the per capita deaths that the US has had.
It's astounding, isn't it? I mean, we need institutions in our world. We need some larger bodies that individuals submit to for, again, the good of all. And when those things are gone, I think Brooks mentioned a book in his op-ed called The Jungle Grows Back. And I haven't read the book, but that idea has never left my mind. Like, this is what happens when those institutions are gone, the jungle grows back. And that jungle is the ego, the human desire for personal ambition and authoritarianism, unfortunately, which we're seeing on the rise around the world. And so I think we'll get back to where you want to go with this. But yeah, we'll get back to spotting this. But it's very important to lay the groundwork that the cult of self has arisen because we are focused on ourselves at the expense of everyone else. We're trying to live our best life, and we're not seeing the ways in which it's actually creating that moral collapse.
Yeah, and I think it's a reasonable question, just before we go on, it's a reasonable question to ask, how much is this cause and how much is it an effect? Like, is there a kind of a collapse, slow motion collapse going on, and the effect of it is this cult of self, and how much is the cult of self the cause? I'm not sure how anyone could tease that out, but they sure seem to go together.
Yeah, and I feel like something that should be addressed before we move on is there is the way in which the cult of self has infiltrated spirituality, I think, has caused us to pursue our best life at the expense of others. But it's a bit more nefarious when you get into like politics and whatnot, because when you have, let's an individual politician, and there are many who are like this, who are out at trying to, it's not just live their best life, it's gain as much power as possible. Then if individual politicians are doing that at the expense of the collective good, the greater good, the country as a whole, the world as a whole, then you set yourself up for the exact kind of dysfunction that we're seeing in the world. And so as spiritual students, I strongly believe it's our job to stand for the alternative, as the Course says, right? Yeah. But we can't do that if we're handmaiden to the same old phenomena. that's
And we
destroying.
almost seem to be like ground zero. I mean, maybe that's just because I'm in the spiritual community, but it feels like we're ground zero for this.
Yeah,
Like,
how can we heal it if we're part of it?
I mean, people outside of the spiritual thing look in and they can spot it, they can see it. And it's sort of like a rolling of the eyes. I remember recently I was watching this TV program on Apple Plus called Severance. And it's kind of a sci-fi thing, but it takes place in more or less present day. And there's this book that's featured, which is kind of, looked at in a making fun of it sort of way. And the book, everyone gets the title because who's watching. The title is The You Are. And you can just see I could just picture the writers of that show just cracking up when they thought of that title. But everyone gets why they would think of the title. That's just in the culture these days.
That is hilarious. That is
Yeah.
a hilarious title. And yet, the writers of that show are making fun of it, but those kinds of things are out in the culture of large. Those kinds of sayings are out in the culture of at large, and we scoop them up on pillows, right? These sayings are on pillows, and we put them on our couch. And so, do you want to talk more about? I know we've been trying to circle back to this, but
Yeah.
how we can spot the cult of self in culture at large?
Well, I mean, you just have to there's a certain sort of vibe, I guess you could say. You just have to learn how it feels. One of the things that I've been noticing is if I go to a gift shop or if I'm at the airport, our culture is full of products and walls and so on that have little slogans on them.
Mm-hmm.
Advertisements, commercials, excuse me, that have sayings. And I've been thinking I want to just go into a gift shop and take pictures. But recently I went online to look up t-shirt slogans. And
we can't find you in one of those gift shops. You just wouldn't step in.
I have stepped in with you. Anyway, I just wanted
Under
to
force.
mention a few of the slogans I found online for t-shirts. And I think you've got some that you just thought of off the top of your head. So one of them is, there is no we in pizza. Let your awesomeness shine through. Rate my appearance. Give it a 10. Be careful. I eat dumb people. Be hot like me. Dream, believe, achieve. And don't let idiots ruin your day.
Yeah, and as you were collecting those, I had mentioned to you that one that I find funny, but it just feeds into what we're talking about today, is not my circus, not my monkeys. And you see that everywhere. And then if we're talking like the South, I know I mentioned this a lot, but there's that phrase, bless your heart, which sounds nice on its face, but everyone here and everywhere else knows that it's just code for F off. And this is symptomatic of what we're talking about, where these sayings have permeated our culture, and they're just another way of saying, me and mine, get out.
Right. It's like, I'm the hero. I'm the awesome one. This is all about me and me satisfying my just ordinary appetites. And you, well, you better not get in the way. You might be one of the idiots, and you definitely don't get any pizza.
Yeah. So is there any other way that we can spot this? So as I'm thinking about this, it's so part of the reason why we haven't really been as public about this topic is because it's so ingrained in us. We are swimming in this water of cult of self, and we cherish it to a large degree.
Yeah, I think we should try to get on to how it manifests in the spiritual scene, but I think in the wider culture, a couple things come to my mind. One, on the left, you see a lot of I am me, I celebrate me in all my diversity. If you don't celebrate me, then F you, right? On the right, I feel like I see it more in my freedom, no matter what the cost. I get to do whatever I want, and the cost to society is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So how do you think this permeates spirituality? We know it's going on in culture at large. How is it spilling into spirituality?
I think it's there in a whole set of emphases and values, and it's there in what's not said or emphasized. So, for instance, spirituality is so much about focusing on our divine nature, our immense potential. It's all about discovering the perfection that we are. And that's just everywhere in spirituality. I think that there is, of course, a huge focus on empowerment, on this innate power we have and using it to manifest our desires. There's a huge focus on how we were mistreated, especially in childhood, how we were traumatized, the need to set our boundaries. It's a view that says, hey, I came into the world innocent and naturally good, and look what the world did to me. And now I've got to claim my peace and my safety and set some good boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that there's no truth in any of these. We have a divine nature. We have immense power. There are times when you set your boundaries, but the emphasis is just huge. There is in contemporary spirituality a really noticeable avoidance of God, especially God as anything like what I call a conscious agent, a personal being. One of my favorite lines along these lines is from Ken Wilber, integral philosopher. He says, there is nothing before which the I must bow and surrender. And he says that as I ascend the spiritual ladder, I never encounter, quote, something greater than me, only higher levels of me. Great line.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
I love it because the whole purpose of the spiritual path is that evolution, like a mental evolution. You are gaining spiritual values so that you can bring yourself home. But if all you see at the top of that mountain is a higher version of yourself, that's actually depressing. And yet,
Well, for many of us, it is. I guess not for all of us.
that is a large part of where we are in spirituality. If you and we have this debate all the time in the circle. We are one with God, and yet there is some distinction there. He is the greater one. Both things are true at the same time. And if you don't have
And
that,
there's a God.
yeah, yeah. Let's start there.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that distinction, if you don't understand that God is the greater one, even though you are one with Him, then all you're going to do is climb the spiritual mountaintop only to find a higher version of yourself. And is that an evolution at all if it's just you?
Yeah. Well, obviously, a great many people feel it is, but I think for you and me, it feels quite empty. And it feels like even though we're trying to, get back to that divine self, if that's all there is, just higher levels of me, doesn't that leave the back door open for narcissism?
It absolutely does, and that's what's happening. So instead of recognizing, hey, maybe the decisions that we make aren't as marvelous and virtuous as we think they are. Maybe we're not as marvelous and virtuous as we think we are. Maybe just because we have an opinion doesn't mean it's right. We learn to question these things instead of exalting them.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to go on with how to spot it in contemporary spirituality, we don't talk a lot in spirituality about like watching out for the damage we do to others, watching out for doing right by them, watching out for serving them, honoring them. Yes, it's not completely absent, but you tend to hear it in certain pockets and not hear much of it at all in other pockets. Instead, the sins that we hear about avoiding are really sins against ourselves, right? Not believing in ourselves enough, not affirming ourselves enough, letting others disrespect ourselves, letting them not appreciate our uniqueness. It's like all the sins these days are sins against the self,
Mm.
which is kind of creepy. Another big one, there is no such thing as the truth, only your truth and my truth. I think there's a straight line from that to like just collapse of society. Maybe, way down the road, but
Well, hold on. We can't go on without saying, I mean, this is a huge part of the collapse of society when no one can agree on facts. No one can, when you have alternative facts,
right.
then to each their own, right? And
Right.
when it's to each their own, there's just chaos. And then you have breakdown. Breakdown follows chaos. And
Yeah.
preceding the chaos is everyone having their own facts and their own truths.
And it used to be, I think, well, for a long time, 80s, 90s, 2000s, the idea of everyone has their own reality, everyone creates their own reality. There's your truth and my truth. That sounds so cool and kind of edgy and progressive. And I think now we get it. We finally have realized the nature of that idea and how destructive it is because we're living in it.
Mm-hmm.
One last thing, huge focus in contemporary spirituality that is kind of anti-mind. It's against the mind, against thinking. It's all about feeling. It's all about the heart. And I think that too is a major element of the cult of self, because what it says is you are not constrained by standards of intellectual truth, good thinking, right and wrong, true and false. You just feel, and those feelings are unconstrained. There's nothing there to tell you or tell them that they're wrong.
It's not even being held up to the standards of good thinking these days in spirituality. It's being held up to the standards of thinking. like thinking itself is the enemy. And that's just bizarre to me.
And what's nice about that is thinking is the way by which we apprehend truths and standards that we are accountable to. If we denigrate thinking, we suddenly move those standards off to one side and our feelings can be unconstrained.
Right. And then when our feelings are unconstrained, then what happens then? Because feelings are often wrong, right? Like you can feel anger and act on it and then really regret that action immediately after,
and you can
or down the road.
You can discover there was no factual basis for it.
True. And so if your thinking is the enemy, but your feelings are the friends, then you're going to live your life in a way where you have a tremendous amount of mess to clean up because you're untrustable, really, and unstable.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I've seen spiritual students who think my feelings are always natural and good, and my job is to be authentic and authentically express them.
Yeah.
And then they wonder like why there's collateral damage when the feelings they expressed were very destructive and hurtful.
Yeah, I said untrustable. I don't think that's the right word. Uncorked is the word that I was looking for. So if your feelings are your guide, then you are going to be uncorked. There's an author, if I said her name right now, everybody listening would know exactly who I'm talking about. And one thing she said in one of her podcasts was her therapist had told her that if she has a feeling, the advice from the therapist is to act on it within 2 minutes. And I've never heard anything scarier in my life. Because how many feelings do we have where if we were to act on them, then we would cause a lot of problems, but for thinking, but for applying some kind of logic or rational thought, we restrain ourselves and prevent someone else from being hurt or some mess that we have to clean up. So this whole idea of thinking is the enemy, but feeling is what matters, and act on every feeling you have is driving us into the ditch in all the ways that we're talking about.
It's interesting because it wasn't that many decades ago that if you said, if you have an angry thought, count to 10 before you speak, and you'd have people going, yeah, count to 10. Nowadays, you have somebody saying, if you have that feeling, then express it, act on it within 2 minutes, and you have everybody saying, yeah. Oh,
I
so
know.
wise.
What happened?
What happened?
What happened? Because in the 2000s, I remember like going through the Stephen Covey training, and it was like, if you have an email that you want to send and it's hot-headed, then wait overnight and send it in the morning. Now it's like, not only send it right then, but be glad you did, because you had something to say and they needed to hear it. Anyway, I know we need to move on, but I just feel like when we talk about all the ways in which this kind of cult of self-thinking has shown up in spirituality, it's important to point out that in that list you've just gone through, you shot a lot of sacred cows. So
I'm thinking the same thing.
So the focus on...
But I had help from you.
And focus on, you're not supposed to tell them that. I'm just supposed to ask the questions. The focus
they heard you. Okay.
On our own, it's true. Focus on our divine nature and immense potential. I mean, yes,
there's truth in all of these things, but there's just not enough truth in all these things.
Yes, thank you. That's what I wanted to say, is that they're all true. We do have a divine nature and immense potential. We can manifest our desires. We do need to set boundaries at times, et cetera, et cetera. But taken to the extreme and turned inward, these things that have some element of spiritual truth actually drive the whole thing backwards.
Right. So, I mean, who can dispute that the mind can be a kind of a block to awakening, to loving? Who can dispute that? But I think we've taken that kernel and just taken it way too far.
Yeah. So, so we talked about the ways in which the cult of self has infiltrated spirituality in general. How has it infiltrated the course community specifically?
As someone who's been in the course community and teaching in it for the better part of 40 years, I feel like it has absolutely invaded the course community. One thing I'm very conscious of is trying to, with the students who come to us, trying to set them straight on all kinds of fundamental views, so that they're thinking in line with the course rather than in line with what they've heard out there or been taught out there. And almost all of the big, if not all the big misunderstandings out there about the course are cult of self stuff. So let me just start going through a list here. This is a repeat from the last category. It's all about me, discovering my true nature. I'm just here to wake up to who I am. In the end, there's only me. I'm all that exists. In the course community, I think we generally see, not 100%, but generally see God as impersonal. He's more of a suchness or essence than a conscious agent. Doesn't know we're here, doesn't have a will for our lives. We don't pray to him. I've heard course students and teachers say, who would I pray to? Like not as a question, but as a rhetorical question. It's very prevalent to think, well, we don't forgive in the conventional sense, we just forgive ourselves. There's a lack of emphasis on going out there to do good. We tend to think there's no world to save, that maybe trying to go out there and do good is just your ego. There's a lot of downplaying of other people in terms of seeing them as just illusions. They're just our projections. Maybe they are out there, but their significance lies in them being our mirror. Notice all of that in all those cases, illusions, well, especially projections and mirror, it comes back to us. We tend to almost universally believe as course students, or at least what I hear taught by course teachers, is a holy relationship just takes one. It's holy when it's holy in my mind. Now, what relationship is only what it is according to your mind? A relationship is a relationship. We tend to be averse to discipline. Rather than aspiring to it and trying to raise ourselves to the level of it, we tend to think of discipline as part of that whole delayed gratification ethic that we've left behind. We shouldn't be forcing ourselves to practice by the clock, so on and so forth. The course is not about behavior. I hear that a lot. And when you say behavior doesn't matter, you are giving the ultimate license to the depravity of human nature, to the human ego in course language. And there's a lot of things we don't hear that we should be hearing in course circles. We should be hearing more about others. I'm going to sometime I have done it, but I forgot what the result was. Do a count of how many times the course says others or another or your brother. The amount of emphasis in the course on other people is huge. And that emphasis doesn't seem to be there much these days in the course community.
Yeah, that's a pretty long list of invasions of cult of self in the course community. Yeah, and I know it's an abbreviated list as well. One thing that's been on my mind about the course for a while now is, as students of this path that is meant to heal the world or contribute to the healing of the world, the course itself hasn't made as much traction as it needs to achieve its goals. And the state of the world needs the course to achieve its goals. But what we're doing in the course community is kind of infighting about what things mean and what concepts are true. And because of that, the course can't get the wheels on it to go out there into the world and to do what it's here to do, to achieve the healing it's meant to achieve.
I would point somewhere else to a degree. I think what's going on is people looking from the outside and they see a lot of flakiness. So those writers saying, let's make up a book that's called the You Are, la ha ha. I think that's the way that people look into the course community. That's that line from the Long Ago Time magazine. I know you got something to say. I'll be quick. That talked about A Course in Miracles, and some expert in New California religions called the course the ultimate disconnected religion for the 90s. It allows driven, self-absorbed people to continue in their ways. I think what people see from the outside is the cult of self run amok to some degree.
Well, that was where I was going with what I was saying, because it's not only that we can't agree on course concepts, it's that the things that we're not agreeing on are this tension between cult of self and what the course is actually saying. So we've mentioned the running away from God. If you don't want to submit to a ultimate authority, even an unconditionally loving one, you remove that authority and make it about you. And so what the course community is doing is kind of pulling in this cult of self ideology and overlaying it on the course in ways that make it impossible for us to have facts about what the course says. And we need those facts. We need to bend ourselves to what the course is saying so that we can become better spiritual students, more loving students, miracle workers in the world. And through us, the course can do what it's meant to do. But if we're not willing to do that, then we suffer because of it. We delay our own journey home, and the course doesn't go out in the world.
The course envisions, if you look carefully at what it expects to happen with its students, it envisions students that are healers, that are teachers, and take on, pupils and mentor them one by one. It envisions students that are incredibly forgiving of others, incredibly extending, whose lives are devoted to being sent out on busy doings to help save the world. It envisions people who are a light to the world because of how they think of, behave towards, and affect others. And we've, like, to some degree, we've really weakened that value in the course community.
And made the course the opposite of what it is. So how can you have, 220 prayers in the workbook where we pray to God? We pray directly to God.
145.
I got that number wrong. We pray directly to God, but have a course community that says there is no God. And who am I praying?
Have people proudly saying, "Who would I pray to?"
Yeah, who am I praying to?
It would be an insult for me to pray to someone. I wouldn't be claiming my divine nature.
And to have a course that says our job is to go out in the world and be miracle workers. It is a course in miracles, after all, and miracles are expressions of love to someone else that heals them. But the cult of
self has redefined them as completely about me.
Right. You.
Sorry.
So what we've done with miracles.
Wasn't that a good point I made?
That was a great point you made. So what we've done with miracles is we've made it about a shift in perception. So it's all completely within our own mind. What was originally, it's Miracle Principles 3, where it talks about going out, and miracles as being healing, going out into the world, miracles being expressions of love. And yet we've made it something completely internal and about ourselves. And so those are all ways in which the cult of self is infiltrating the course, invading, I think is what the word you used. I think that's a better word. Invading the course community in ways that's just setting the whole thing back. We aren't using spiritual principles to heal. We are using spiritual principles to manifest our personal desires, and that is taking everything off the rails.
And often relabel things that are of our ego, but we can find some clever spiritual relabeling of them that makes them really positive and worth affirming.
So
we're on kind of a rant here, aren't we?
What? No.
I think the dike has broken.
No, we're still on the stream. So
okay.
What do we need to know to kind of override this behavior within ourselves?
That's, I think, the big question. And I think, let me just sort of think out loud here. I think what we need to do is have the concept that there is this pervasive thing that may not be ancient truth. It may be a very recent contemporary thing. It may not be eternal truth. It may not be A Course in Miracles. It may be something that, rather than elevating to the height of cutting edge wisdom, we need to watch out for. And that's what I do. I've very, very slowly over many, many years now learned to think, like I used to think, oh, wow, everyone's saying that, so it must be true. And now I think, because when you hear all these teachers, many of them, are mystics and spiritual masters and appear to be enlightened and so on. When you hear them all saying some of the same things, you think, they've pierced the veil and they're seeing the same eternal reality. And so I just should trust it. Now I think maybe what they've done is just learn what pleases their audience, or maybe they've just kind of soaked in by osmosis, because we're all social creatures. And so rather than it being testimony, if 10 people say it, it must be true. Maybe if 10 people say it, it must be current. It must be in vogue. And
I have to tell you, if 10 people say it, it's not that it must be true. If 10 people are saying it must be current, that's good. We should really keep that in mind.
Okay. So what's happened with me is I've slowly started to think, oh, everyone's on this train, and it's not a good train. And it doesn't mean I reject everything they say. I think people have all kinds of true eternal truths laced in there with the cult of self influence. So you don't want to reject everything they say. Some people have very, very little cult of self influence. I often tell you that the Stoics have zero cult of self. They just aren't doing any business with the cult of self whatsoever because they were rooted in ancient thinkers from a long time ago.
Ryan Holiday, who wrote this book, who's a big Stoic person, touting the benefits and the wisdom of Stoicism. He came out with a book recently called "The Ego is the Enemy," and you and I were like, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
he just said it. He said the
Right.
thing that we need to be saying as course students.
Yeah.
Not the ego is the thing that I dance with that keeps me safe in an unsafe world. No, if you are not calling the ego out on its behaviors, then how are you ever going to catch yourself in them? Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not a Stoic. The course is not Stoicism. The Stoics, they just believe the world was reality is a hard, painful place. And you can think differently about it. The course believes that reality is God's perfect creation, and you can think differently about it. But you got to hand it to them because they don't make any concessions to the cult of self, and we can be like that too.
Can I just say one thing before you move on? This is a self-fulfilling thing. So what you're saying before about this is like, if you hear all of the spiritual influencers, those who are out there on the stages saying these things, as an audience member, you are thinking, oh, if everyone's saying the same thing, it must be true.
Right.
But
Right.
there's a pressure in the spiritual influencer space to say the thing that is going to continue to increase your influence.
Yeah.
And so you get into this real mental divide where, do I say the thing that's true or do I say the thing that they want to hear? And I'll give you one example of that. If you want to make heads nod in an audience, say some form of what I said on stages coast to coast. Forgive not because they deserve forgiveness. Forgive because you deserve peace. Now, that's Emily being totally cult of selfie. But there's a drug in the audience, like nodding their head and turning to the side and being with you and kind of loving you for the message, because the audience wants the message of use your spiritual truth to get what you want in the world. The audience doesn't tend to want the course's message of your enemy is your friend. You got to love them anyway and go out there and be miracle workers in the world, even if you don't feel like it. And so that's
example.
It's a hard message. And so as course teachers, we're delivering a message sometimes that people don't want to hear.
Sure.
And as someone who's delivered the message that people don't want to hear, and someone who's delivered the message they want to hear, I like the warm and fuzzy better. And so it becomes this reinforcing loop. And so that's where it's kind of permeated, because if all the influencers are saying the same thing, then because it's what their audiences want to hear, then we end up with more cult of self, which is exactly what's happened.
Exactly. And so what we have to do, and it's what I've very, very slowly learned to do over a lot of years, is be willing to say, you know what? 1,000 teachers have told me the mind is the enemy, and they're all just riding the cult of self train. Not 1,000 teachers told me that, and therefore it must be true. I just think they're all riding that train. And it's a dangerous teaching, in my view.
I think manifesting is a dangerous teaching, because it sets you up for the very dangers that we're talking about, using spiritual truth to achieve what you want versus bending your own values to what is ultimately true. And so then your life becomes about the acquisition of things and not about serving something higher than yourself.
And so when you hear the 25th teacher tell you about manifesting, don't say it must be true. Say, oh, well, there's riding that train.
Yeah. And also, I just feel like we should point out that the manifesting works. It totally works. I'm not saying it's
It
like snake
mostly
oil.
totally backfires.
Well, no.
It works at times and mostly only works for the teacher teaching it.
Well, that's true. I mean, there is a pyramid scheme going on there, but I just want to acknowledge the truth in you can do it but it's not the spiritual mountaintop. So I
It's
just
not the
feel like
spiritual
that needs to be
mountaintop.
said.
And I heard about a study that showed that the people who visualize their goals already being theirs reach those goals less. Because you go after a goal because there's a tension between what you want and what you don't have. If you keep telling yourself, I have it, I have it, I have it, and you visualize all the zeros and you experience, you don't go after it as much. So yeah, there are times, I've experienced times in my distant past where things got manifested, okay? But I think on the whole, it actually backfires for the very goals it's going after.
We're going to do a separate podcast on manifesting because
Yeah,
we're both up on our little pedestals about it.
we are.
But let's move on to the next thing in how do we override this influence?
Well, I think what we do is we kind of make a considered conclusion that will probably take us a long time to make, that it's not the course, it's not the truth, and that the actual truth is just way better for us. It's more beautiful, it's more lofty, it's ultimately more affirming. And then we learn how to spot it, and when we spot it, we just say, no, that's people riding that train. That's not my path. That's not the truth that I believe in. And I think that's that. But deciding it's way better and learning how to make the distinction, I think is the whole journey.
But how would one do the very thing that you're advocating for, like spotting it and saying, no, I don't want that, if thinking is the enemy? Like what we've done as a society, in part through the cult of self, is denigrated thinking itself, which has made us less able to think critically, which has resulted in the very declines that we've been talking about throughout this whole episode.
Well, I think one thing to do, I think it's always crucial to say these things I've heard 1,000 times. Maybe the course teaches something very different. And then we can look on the page. You know, the course never puts down the mind. It calls the mind the means the Holy Spirit has chosen for your salvation. The mind is the means chosen by the Holy Spirit for your salvation. So once we think what we've heard may not be what the course actually teaches, we can kind of take refuge in what the course teaches, and then those issues get solved for us.
Yeah, and part of spotting it too is when you're taking issue with what the course teaches on the level of viewing other people as worthy and there at all and investing in forgiveness, like rather than try and take the overlay of the cult of self and apply it to the teaching to wash away what's on the page, have some like healthy respect for what's on the page, and maybe that's the truth, not the feeling that we have about what we see there, which could just be our own resistance that we're elevating to lowercase t truth, right?
Yeah, let the course overrule what you've heard and what everyone says.
Yeah. So I feel like we're past the hour. We've covered quite a bit. Is there anything that you want to say? This has been spirited, and I like these discussions with you. Is there anything that you want to say about the cult of self before we close?
Well, I think just to reiterate something you said earlier, we have to appreciate that in all these things that we have just now been openly criticizing for an hour, there's truth in there. Doesn't mean we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it also doesn't mean that having a modicum of truth in a position is enough. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Something can contain truth and still contain a lot else. And other things that can be quite destructive. So I think we just have to have sensitive, open minds, willing to make some fine distinctions, to be generous, to be open, but ultimately to be able to say, this thing that I've been hearing and saying actually isn't what the course teaches, and I'm going to go with my teaching.
Yeah, and I think once again it's very important to kind of not just swim in this water of cult of self, but to be aware of it, to be aware of the dangers of it, to be on the alert for it in ourselves and in culture at large, and to start to act against it, to start to question it, to really see the effect that it's having on society and the delay that it's having on our own spiritual journey, to see the breakdown that's
Yeah.
happening as a result of it, and one by one start to repair that, and to take the focus off the self so much and put it on helping and healing and serving and being miracle workers in the world. So
Yeah.
Robert, thank you as always, and I'll see you next time for our next discussion. Once again, if you are wanting to participate in these podcast recordings live, you are more than welcome. There is no charge. You can visit circleofa.org/events, and we will see you here every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Bye for now.